Hello and welcome to discussion today on Rajya Sabha TV. I am Tina Jha. Today we are going to talk about the uniform minimum age for marriage. Well, the Supreme Court has agreed to examine a plea to transfer to itself cases pending in the Delhi and Rajasthan High Courts to declare a gender-neutral uniform minimum age for marriage. The Apex Court bench, headed by Chief Justice S.A. Bobde, took note of the submissions of senior advocate Geeta Luthra, appearing for petitioner Ashwini Upadhyay, that similar pleas are pending in the two high courts and that they be transferred to the Apex Court for an authoritative pronouncement on the issue. In order to avoid multiplicity of litigations and conflicting views, the top court has sought a response from the centre in this regard. The plea seeking a uniform minimum age for marriage for men as well as women calls for gender justice, gender equality as well as dignity of women. Besides, it has also sought a direction to the centre to take appropriate steps to remove the anomalies in the minimum age of marriage and make it gender neutral, religion neutral and uniform for all citizens, which is in the spirit of the fundamental rights of equality and right to life, as well as international conventions. So on this edition of discussion today, we will analyse the need for a gender-neutral minimum age for marriage. And for this, we have with us two special guests who will be sharing their perspective with us on the subject. Let me introduce them to you. We have with us Geeta Luthra, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court, and Ms. Jaya, she is Chairperson, Task Force for Examining Child Marriage, Infant Mortality and Maternal Mortality. I welcome both you distinguished panelists on this edition of discussion today. Geeta ji, let me begin the program with you because you are directly related to the case which has now gone to the Supreme Court. You know, this was one issue, increasing the age of marriage for women from 18 to 21, which the government was also working towards. And we heard the Prime Minister, in fact, mention this very issue in one of his Independence Day speech, after which the government went on to constitute a task force as well, of which Jaya is the chairperson. She's also joining us. So when the government was already working towards, increasing the age of women from 18 to 21 for marriage, what was the need at the moment to take this case, to take this issue to the top court?
So the first thing is that we are not necessarily saying that the age should be increased to 21. We are also saying that please explore that the age be reduced. So we have very many reasons to do that.
Okay.
My first argument is there should be a uniform age. And that uniformity of age is because we can see that what is being felt by the statute as at present in various enactments is that women should be younger than men so that that position of control and authority remains over a person who is younger by a person who is older. So first aspect is remove the patriarchal scheme, let it be a uniform age for men and women. So that's the first argument. The second is, in Sarla Mudgal's case, it was Supreme Court that said, let's have a uniform civil code. One of the concomitants will be the fact that there should be an age which should be cutting across all religions, not puberty as it is in Islam, not according to the Christian Marriage Act, not according to the Special Marriage Act, not according to the Hindu Marriage Act. In fact, the Indian Majority Act prescribes 18 as the majority age for girls and boys. Isn't it then strange, if that's the age of majority, that a person, particularly a man, should have to wait 3 years to get married? So one of the arguments will be, of course, that sex and marriage are not correlated. But to my mind, there is a correlation, and that is that every day before the high courts and Supreme Courts, and I'm talking for the last 20 years or more, we've had we've had cases where people are coming to court and they are running away, young girls and boys, and then you have this issue that their marriage is illegal and or they are running away illegally, and then you have a kidnapping and rape case foisted on the boy. So let's rationalize the entire situation. Both girls and boys, the age should be similar, and what it should be is something which needs to be examined scientifically, medically, from the viewpoint of psychologists and psychiatrists, from the viewpoint of the fact that young children are maturing earlier, and which is why you are amending various provisions of criminal law, trying to make those who were minors responsible, because you are saying people are maturing earlier. Then you can't say that you increase the age rather than reduce the age. So I'm saying that the first basic principle is Article 14 and Article 15 of the Constitution of India. There has to be equality before the law. That equality begins with having the same age for girls and boys. There is a convention which India is not a signatory to, but it's a 1962 convention. At least it wasn't till I last know. It's a convention on consent to marriage, minimum age for marriage, registration of marriage, 1962. And this was pursuant to General Assembly meetings, pursuant to various committees on equality for women when this convention was there. And India is still not a signatory. Perhaps India had suggested certain amendments. Those amendments, if I recall correctly, were not accepted. Now we have to look, how are we going forward? Because we are not having a uniform policy on the Indian Penal Code, in the Indian Majority Act, in the various acts with regard to various religions for Muslim women and men. So we have to bring in some uniformity.
Okay.
And the need of the hour is to come to the courts, because look, who has struck down adultery, for example? It is the courts. So very often courts come in where Parliament may be slow in treading for reasons of sensitivity, sentimentality, for hurting any religious feelings. Therefore, the courts are far more pragmatic in that sense. And that's why we pray to the courts for this this transfer petition.
Looking at the complexity and the sensitivity of this issue, how desirable it is, we'll try and understand that later on in the program. But Jayaji, coming to you at the moment, for your perspective on this very subject, I understand the government has not released the recommendations, the report of the task force, but as an individual, what is your take on the issue? Should the age of marriage for women be increased from 18 to 21? Or, if you could also share with us, viewers, the general view among the committee members as to what the government said on reconsidering this proposal.
Yes, well, I'm glad we're discussing it, and I'm glad that more or less of what Geeta is saying and what we all believe are on the same lines. Gender equality for us in the task force has been the sine qua non, because I believe that what exactly she said, that patriarchal views do not hold anymore. You cannot expect the girl to be younger and the boy to be older. We took a lot of things into consideration. We did consult not just NGOs working on these issues, NGOs working with young girls in backward areas. We had the views of college students, college and university students across 1,600 educational institutions. I was very keen as the chairperson about two things. One, we must listen very carefully and give priority to the actual stakeholders. It's okay for all of us to decide legally and psychologists and elders, but what do the young people feel? That was most important because it's their lives that we are
Absolutely.
trying to guide. So I paid attention more to that. So we insisted that we get all these questionnaires sent out to colleges across the board, not just urban, because the urban views are very different from rural views, not just difference as such, but because of the circumstances. The helplessness of the rural girl in enforcing any view at all is something we all know and we have to take note of. So that was one thing. The second thing was that because infant mortality and maternal mortality were important and equally concentrated upon in this task force, we concentrated a lot on health and education. Because unless you improve the health of young girls and the education of both boys and girls, you can't ever really get a good outcome. A marriage is not just a legal age, stamping a paper, tying a knot, going around the fire, and then leave their lives to be made a mess of just because you've legalized it.
Yes.
They have to understand and be capable of earning a living and handling a child. It's a big responsibility these days bringing up a child. And unless the parents are themselves educated, I remember Justice Venkatachalaya telling me once when he was head of the Human Rights Commission that today 60% of our children are born with low IQ because the mothers are malnourished and because there is no IQ in the family that brings a child to understand what studies are all about. So it's a very sad situation, and we had to take all these things into account. The most important, I can't share our main recommendations. I know everybody's curious. All I can hint at is yes, we have asked for equal age, gender equality, but whether lowering the boy or raising the girl, it's not in my place to say.
Yes.
But on the borders of all of that, I will say something which we found extremely interesting, and that was every single youth we consulted, whether rural, urban, studying, not studying, laborer's child or well-to-do child, nobody wanted to get married at least before the age of 22, which was really interesting. I'm glad because it shows every age, no matter what, girls are aspirational. Boys, a few boys who spoke up wanted the marriage not before 24 or 25. So the trend also in India, although we have 15 million children, cases of child marriage, which is the highest anywhere in the world, we have reduced it from a 52% to a 27% now. So the trend is lowering. We raised it from 16 to 18 earlier because of population control being an issue. Today, population control is not the issue. Girls' empowerment, women's empowerment is the issue. And I think that's a good change of thinking that we also have in society.
Yes.
One very nice thing also that I found was that in the bureaucracy, they are very aware that children today, and children were frank about it too, that marriage or not, they do indulge in physical relationships very early. And they don't really wait for marriage. Now, the fact is that we should never be judgmental about this. We're giving them all the inputs from media and everywhere else that encourages them to think about romance and all sorts of things. And they have to be educated in schools about education of sex education, mutually respecting each other. What precautions do you take? Now, I find, for instance, the children telling us from rural areas that the sex education chapter in their school syllabus, the teachers are too shy to discuss in class. They say, "Ghar mein jaake padho." So that is, how are they going to learn? Nobody, in the parents certainly won't tell them what's in the textbook. So we have problems like that. We have a lot to be done. So I would believe that while we need to change the law, equally, we need to put in a huge amount of effort in creating health conditions, even clean bathrooms, sanitary pads in schools and classrooms. It's a major reason that makes girls go to school at all. if they're feeling awkward about those times of the month they do go to school and they miss out on studies. Then there's the question of internet. Education policy, also suddenly the new education policy came in between. So we had to gear our thing towards that. If you want a girl to be as aspirational and
And
getting the kind of education
a
offered.
change in social attitude as well. I'll come back to you, ma'am. But Geeta ji, let me take you back in time and understand the logic behind this distinction that was made. The minimum age for marriage, which is currently in India, was last amended way back in 1978. And the contention is that there was no scientific evidence to prove that women mature faster than men, and that's why the minimum age for marriage for girls should be 18 and for men it should be 21. But, could it also be the economic compulsions that existed back then in society? For example, the dowry system was prevalent, and such compulsions in some, even though in very smaller sections, but are prevalent even today. So if we have a law which is for the good of the society, how do we get this social behavioral change to understand, that, there should be equality when it comes to the age of marriage?
See, the dowry practices should not help in reducing the age of girls. It could possibly lead to increasing the ages because people would be able to accumulate more dowry for their daughters. I think that's not the answer. The question may be that girls may be treated as a burden and therefore you say, let them go off. That could be a logic. Now, the fact is that the convention, the CEDAW convention, which is elimination of discrimination against women, acknowledges this aspect that many countries have different ages because there was a basis that they thought that women were intellectually inferior to men, matured mentally later than men. Now, this was the rationale. And it's not a dowry rationale. It can be getting rid rationale. Dowry rationale would work opposite. But this rationale of not having an extra mouth to feed and this rationale of women being, I think, subjugated. And therefore, if the man is older, he'll be in a more a position apart from his economic strength. And thinking that women are not intellectually maturing as fast. This is what the CEDAW Convention, the Beijing Convention said. And India became, I think, endorsed it in 1994. But the fact is that I still believe, because I see in the courts how many young couples run away and how many young couples, why do they run away? They run away because the parents are opposed to their relationships. And then they fall foul of law. So a judgment, if I recall correctly, by Justice Manmohan Sareen and Justice Aruna Suresh, Delhi High Court said, if they are near 17, it should be permitted because, see, the girl was near 18, it was consensual, she was mature. Mm-hmm. But the Supreme Court then turned it down, saying that if there is a statutory age, then that statutory age is mandatory. So people may not, young men and women that you may ask, may say that we want to study and we do not want to get married. But love sometimes does not realize these frontiers. And that's the problem. And however much we may be with regard to, having relations in today's world among the urban people earlier, the fact is that in many communities, you won't even be able to have access to your boyfriends. So there will be people who would be keen to get married rather than have an opposition. That's the context in which I feel that there is a difference between some people who would want to study, some people who are brought up in a sheltered rural atmosphere, some people who may be going to co-ed colleges and institutions, meeting girls and boys of different ages and wanting to have a permanent relationship. That is why if we look at the UK, we look at Australia, I think we look at New Zealand, we look at Germany, we look at many parts of the world, they brought in 18 as the age.
Okay.
So most have rationalized it.
The majority of the countries have 18, but some, of course, do have a little older, and many of the more what we would probably consider regressive countries, where they keep the girl under tight control, theirs are sometimes even 16. So those situations exist, but I still feel that if society overall, it's love is one thing, but then if they produce children, those children also are not are too young. The boy then runs away because he cannot bear the burden of the financial problems that come when the young girl and the mother and the child have to be looked after. So I don't know how much the government can go into all this. I don't think the government can and should take love into account. That's why this love jihad is something that we should not get involved in.
But I'm not talking about love jihad.
No, okay. So since we're talking about, the government should not be getting into a lot of things, Geeta ji, that brings me to a question that, this is a very religiously sensitive issue as well, very, very emotional also for different sections, because there are 5 laws in our country that provide for this distinction in the minimum age for women and men. So, of course, it has religious connotations as well. So, should interference by courts be desirable? And what do you think? Will it be acceptable as well in the larger picture when we talk about different religious groups in society?
So, in many senses, according to me, the court's word becomes the last word. And if you will look at many emotive issues, for example, adultery, in the context of issues with regard to marrying only one person, monogamous marriages, only being able to tread on that path. And that is why there are petitions being filed for the guardianship law becoming uniform, for the divorce law becoming uniform, for minimum age being uniform, because the hope, the last stop, the buck stops here, is where the courts are. There's only one aspect which I didn't cover. CEDAW also discusses what is the age which should be the best age in terms of health of a girl. And it says that 20 and above for having children is perhaps the earliest that they should have children. But marriage and having children could easily be dichotomized. If love and marriage can be dichotomized, then this can be dichotomized. So I feel that this is an interesting issue, but I do believe that our hope lies in the court's interference on the basis of the right to equality of men and women.
Okay. Jayaji, there is no doubt that, policies help guide the society. But because we are talking about disparity here at 2 levels, gender as well as religion. So, of course, there will be changes required at the social level as well. So, apart from a legislation that, of course, is the first step, what else is required to bring about a positive change in social attitude as far as this subject is concerned?
I would just say what the task force has recommended, and that is very strong inputs both for health and education to encourage girls, especially in backward areas, in tribal areas, and that I think they've done with Eklavya schools now for girls, in this current budget. And the fourth thing we've added is strong campaigning, and not to rush it until people have been well educated in society. Whatever change you make, don't thrust it on people overnight, but campaign through rural areas, village discussions, theatre groups, music, songs, posters, examples. You can have, like brand ambassadors, girls who have flown the Rafale aircraft, for instance, or the sports women who have come up so well in the last few years. So people like these who are examples in society, who will tell girls that you can aspire to all this. Marriage is parallel. It's not one or the other. That is the main message that has to go, that you should be able to work and aspire after marriage, not get bogged down being looked at as a housewife or a slave or just purely a mother. So I think this is going to need societal change. Courts must support, government policy should support, and society itself hopefully will evolve sooner rather than later to understand that people have freedom of choice, but they must choose wisely.
Certainly. Okay, Geeta ji, very quickly, one concluding remark from you on what is the best way forward to secure a gender equal world, which of course looks like a long way ahead for us.
See, I feel from the tenor of Jayaji's statements that she is not in favor of the 18 age. I feel that today we have to look for, and we have to see the rationale both from medical, psychological. People are maturing earlier. You are accepting in changing your penal laws. So let's look at it from an overall perspective. Law has to be made with the next 30 years or 50 years in mind.
Yes.
Law cannot be a knee-jerk reaction with each of our legislation having different ages. How it does not appeal to the rational mind that the Indian Majority Act, which is an old act, said 18. And then you went zigzag in various enactments, 54, 56, 75, etc. So you have to rationalize it, sooner the better. And this rationality, if not done by Parliament, will have to be done by the courts.
Certainly. So a law is, of course, the first step towards ensuring a gender-neutral, uniform minimum age for marriage, of course, for both men and women. But as Geeta ji said, law cannot be a knee-jerk reaction. It has to be far-sighted, keeping into mind the next 30 to 50 years. But at the same time, social behavior should also constantly change, keeping in mind the changing social status and the equal opportunities that now women are getting in the current context. So with that, I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of Discussion Today. Let me remind our viewers that just in case you missed the television broadcast of our program, you can also watch it on YouTube, and you can send in your feedback and suggestions as well. Thank you for your time.